Welcome to Then and Now. This is a podcast where we bridge history and the headlines, the past and the present, one story at a time. I'm your host, Denny, and in today's episode, we're talking about a subject that is very touchy, and that is the whole story of migration and how immigrants or migrants have changed and can change and will change the face of the West. And I'm telling the story of the West through the lens of the country of England. And we're going to draw a comparison. We're going to draw a line between the migrants who are arriving on English shores today in rubber dinghies and the ones that came centuries ago, long before England was even England. It's a story you've heard before. Small boats braving the waves of the English Channel, men, women, children seeking refuge or opportunity. Some of them are fleeing wars, persecution, poverty. Some call it, in the media, they call it a crisis. Others call it an invasion. Whatever you call it, the flow of primarily Muslim migrants will change the Western world. But what if I told you that this wasn't the first time that the shores of England were changed by those who crossed the water in search of a better life? Of course, we can cite the Norman conquerors. We can even cite the Viking raiders. But I want to go even further back than that. I want to go all the way back to the 5th century. This was a time when the Romans had packed up and they were leaving Britain. And the Roman Empire was crumbling, and into this vacuum there stepped a myth, a leader, a symbol of resistance and hope. His name? King Arthur. Before we delve into Arthur, though, let's discuss very briefly what is happening now. Every year, and some people would say every day, hundreds of individuals attempt to cross the English Channel in small, overcrowded boats. Many leave from the Middle East, Africa, and they journey to France, and then they attempt to enter Britain. Often they risk their lives and they make this perilous journey. The British government has responded. They have tried a mixture of deterrence. They have tried tightening the borders. They have tried building processing centers, detaining arrivals, and they have even in recent times tried to outsource the asylum processing to Rwanda, although we haven't heard that much about that recently, so we don't know what's happening there. And if you listen to the media, the language that people are using is very striking. They're calling it crisis, they're calling it a surge, they're calling it an invasion. And the images that are being used are also very emotive. Yet beneath the headlines is a quieter truth. Some of these people are escaping horrors that we can barely imagine. They're escaping torture, hunger, and all they really want is what any of us want. They want safety, they want stability, and they want the chance at a better life. Now, let me be clear. This is where I'm going to put in my disclaimer, because as somebody who is a lover of history, we know that there are a couple of sides to any story. Illegal migration in these modern times is wrong. There's a reason why there's that word illegal in the sentence. It creates all sorts of problems for the host countries, especially when there is a clash of cultures. And that is what has been happening a lot. I believe that the people who wish to move from one country to another, they should follow the rules. They really, really should follow the rules. And while it is true that there are some migrants who are fleeing horrible conditions in their home countries. There are some of them who are not fleeing horrible conditions, and they are making everything bad. So we have to look at the fact that there are some persons who really do need help, and there are some persons who do not need help. So this whole topic of immigration is rather ticklish. But I ask you the question, is this moment truly new? Is it new? Or is it just a part of a long and cyclical story? So let's turn back the clock a little. We're going to draw some comparisons and we're going to do some contrasts. We're in the year around 410, thereabouts. At this time, Britain is in chaos. And notice I'm using the word Britain, I'm not saying England, because England wasn't really established yet. So it's Britain. So Britain was in chaos. The Roman Empire, which had ruled the land for nearly 4 centuries, was now withdrawing its troops and with the legions gone, the infrastructure is collapsing. There's no more protection from raiders, no more centralized governments. And with this collapse, tribal warlords, local rulers, and foreign mercenaries move in to fill the gap. Among these foreigners is the Anglos, Saxons, and Jutes. Some persons might argue that there isn't that much evidence for the Jutes, but I'm still going to say the Jutes came over as well. So they arrived in waves. They were crossing the sea just as today's migrants are doing. But back then, there was a bit of a twist to this story, because there's a little bit more. There's always a little bit more to these stories. These invaders, the Anglos and the Saxons, they actually came first as hired soldiers. How did this happen? Remember we said that the Romans are gone. They've left England. And with the departure, the native Britons, these were the native people of the land who were not Romanized. They were always at odds with the Romans. They were always fighting them in these skirmishes and so on. They started to crowd in and attack the former Roman settlements. They were attacking the Roman settlements as well as those Britons who, for all intents and purposes, were Roman citizens. So there were Britons who became Romanized, and then there were Britons who were never Romanized. And the ones who were not Romanized started to attack the Romanized Britons, the more civilized, quote-unquote, Britons. They started to attack them. There was this local ruler called Vortigern. He decided to hire some soldiers, the Saxons, to come across the waters to fight off the local tribes. So he invited the Saxons to come and fight the local Britons who were trying to subsume the Romanized Britons. The problem was that when the mercenaries were done fighting, they didn't leave. They did not leave. In fact, they sent word back to their families and friends, probably like what some of these migrants are doing these days. You know, they're getting their phones. They're getting their phones and they're calling their friends back in wherever they came from. And they're telling their friends how they too can brave the waters and come over to England. It's what these Saxons did. So they sent word back to their families and told them that they should come over to England. Now, it is around this time that a British leader arose to resist them. He was a warlord. Perhaps he was actually a Romanized British noble. And what happened is that he became the stuff of legends. You know him, King Arthur. Arthur's story is somewhat murky because he's part myth, part memory. So allow me please to give you a brief description, a brief retelling of the story of King Arthur, the once and future king, so we can understand who he was and why he is important. Arthur wasn't really born a king. In most versions of his story, he was actually the secret son of this warlord called Uther Pendragon. After many years, when, as I said, the Romans had left and England had no ruler, or at least no very clear ruler, the rival lords fought for control. And then one day, the stone appeared in a churchyard, and there was a sword thrust into the stone. It was no ordinary sword, because it was a sword that was going to mark the true king. And only the true king could actually pull the sword free from the stone. So many tried, but none succeeded. But one day, the young Arthur was able to pull the sword free. And this is how people knew that he was the chosen one. This legendary blade, known as Excalibur, it marked Arthur as a king, not just of Britain, but of destiny. Some say the sword made Arthur invincible, others say it symbolized divine favor, but in all versions of the story, it becomes a part of Arthur's identity, so you can't separate Arthur from the sword Excalibur. Now, under Arthur's rulership, the realm found unity. He built Camelot. We all have heard of Camelot. It's a shining court where law, justice, chivalry, and justice were all prized. And around him he gathered the knights of the Round Table, men that we have all heard of. We know Sir Lancelot, his best knight, Sir Gawain, Sir Percival, and Sir Galahad. And each knight was sworn to protect the realm and uphold the ideals of knighthood. To avoid pride and hierarchy, Arthur used a round table where no knight sat above the other. All of the knights and Arthur himself rode out on the quest to right wrongs, fight monsters, and defend the innocent. And of course, we know the greatest quest of all that he went on was the search for the Holy Grail. This is the sacred cup that was supposed to bring divine grace. So what does all of this have to do with migration or illegal migration? Arthur's true mission, his whole reason for being, was to fight off the invaders. The Anglos, Saxon, Jutes, and even the native Britons who were not Romanized, they were all heathens. These barbarians had not accepted the one true faith of Rome, and so they all had to be kept out of Britain at all cost. The fear was that if they were allowed to enter, they would change Britain with their heathen ways. As noble as Arthur was, though, he was human, and human weaknesses crept into his court, came over into Camelot, and it divided the court, and it also caused his downfall. So here's what happened. His queen, Guinevere, and his best knight, Sir Lancelot, fell in love. Their affair broke Arthur's heart and also divided the court. Arthur himself had an illegitimate son, or a nephew. It was a son/nephew. This son was called Mordred, and Mordred grew up in secret, but he was ambitious and he was very bitter. Mordred eventually rebelled against Arthur. He seized the throne in Arthur's absence, and he plunged the country into civil war. In the final battle, Arthur fought his son. Knights turned on knights. Arthur was actually mortally wounded in this battle, and he killed his son Mordred. The wounded Arthur was placed on a barge, and the barge sailed toward the Isle of Avalon. It's a place of healing and mystery. Some say he died there, others say he sleeps still, waiting to return when Britain needs him most. That is why Arthur is called the once and future king. Was Arthur real? Was he a real person? Well, historians have long debated this. There is no real concrete proof of a real King Arthur. But there was a time of turmoil after Rome had left Britain in the 5th century, and there was a figure who was able to unite the Romanized Britons to fight off the Saxon invaders. The earliest references to Arthur actually came from Wales. It's found in a Welsh poem, and there were early chronicles, but it wasn't until medieval times that writers like Geoffrey of Monmouth and Sir Thomas Malory turned Arthur into the king of legend. But myth, memory, legend, fact, why does Arthur matter today? Because in today's world, the truth is that people still long for leaders who unify and inspire, who rise above petty squabbles for a greater cause. In times of uncertainty, people reach for stories such as Arthur's, stories of nobility, justice, and destiny. What he represents, though, is clear. He is somebody who stood up for something. He fought off invasion that he thought was not good for his country. He was a man who stood against the tide of migration. Over the next centuries, those Saxons, the migrants that Arthur was fighting so bravely against, they reshaped the island completely. They changed the language, they changed the law, they changed place names. They didn't just come and go, they became the English. And here's a twist. Some persons say that Arthur lost because the invaders actually came and changed the nation. As I said before, they changed the language, they changed the whole face, the whole complexion of England. But I argue that Arthur actually did win. The Saxons, the Anglos, the Jutes, whoever they were, the Celts, they all became Christians. These once despised migrants who were heathens, barbarians, who did not know the true religion, they actually became English Christians. So what can we learn from these parallel crossings? Back then, the boats brought Saxons. Now they bring Syrians. In both cases, people crossing the water are seeking something better. The response then was resistance, then came assimilation, and finally, transformation. Today, we're seeing the same thing. There's a lot of resistance, but assimilation is what needs to take place. Assimilation has to take place before there can be proper transformation. What began as fear and violence gave way to something enduring, a new cultural identity, a new language, a new nation that held on to its religious values, or held on to Christian religious values. Today we stand at a similar crossroads. Arthur stood with a sword, modern leaders wield policies, but history reminds us that change is inevitable, and resistance without any vision often leads to ruin. When we talk about migrant crisis, we often forget that we are watching something ancient unfold, wearing a modern dress. Boats arriving, cultures meeting, tensions rising, but also societies evolving. Arthur couldn't stop the Saxons, nor could the Romans before him stop the Britons. So the next time you hear the word invasion, think of Arthur. Think of the people who came by boats long before us. And think of the England they built, not in spite of migration, but because of it. This has been Then and Now, and I'm your host, Denny. If you like this episode, please subscribe. Share with somebody you think might like it. Leave us a comment. And remember, history isn't behind us. It's beneath our feet. It's all around us. Thank you for watching.